Hello everyone, Brian Koval here, Biological Coordinator with the Peninsula Streams Society here in Greater Victoria on beautiful Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. And I'm very pleased to bring to you today our second webinar of our November webinar series titled Colquitz Watershed Stewardship. If I could guide your attention to the photo on the right, that's the team that undertook the Colquitz Restoration Project near Copley Park. Quite a savvy crew, as you can see, and there's a diversity of people there, including staff from the municipality of Saanich, Peninsula Streams staff, um, Altera Spider Excavating, as well as DR Clough Consulting. And we'll be speaking more on that project a little later in the presentation. So, an outline of today's webinar can be found on the left. Lots of groups and areas to talk about. If you have a look at the photo on the right, you'll be looking at the Friends of Swan Creek Watershed. Now, the Friends of Swan Creek Watershed have been working on that creek since about 2012, and they've added about 100 metric tons of rock and gravel to the creek since then. If you could imagine the creek before then, essentially a clay ditch, and now just writhe with beautiful salmon habitat, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But I just wanted you to have a look at this pile of gravel in front of them, and they certainly put all of that into the creek in 1 year. Massive amount of respect for these volunteers. So here we have an overview map of the watersheds found in Greater Victoria. As you can see, there's quite a diversity, and in many of them today our focus will be on the Colquitz watershed. You'll see the yellow box pointing that out, but I just want to point out that those other ones that we mentioned on this slide are featured in other webinars, so please tune in if you want to learn more about those. What I'm going to do now though is we're going to zoom in on the Colquitz watershed. Have a look, because you'll see some red, some yellow, and some green. And what the red means is those are impervious surfaces. These could be things like roads, parking lots, structures like buildings. As you can see, there's quite a bit focused down in the south. If you look at the yellow, that indicates farmland. And also there's green that represent trees and shrubs. And as you can see, there's quite a diversity of things going on here. So how we're going to go through this webinar is we're going to start up at the top, Elk Beaver Lake, talking about Haliburton Brook, an exciting new group that's dove into restoring that bit of creek. We'll also speak on the Goward Springs area, which flows down into Viaduct Flats, Quick's Bottom, and then to Colquitz Mainstem itself. And from there, we'll speak a bit about the Colquitz Mainstem project undertook in partnership with Saanich. And then we'll move down to the Lochside Meadow, which just runs down along Blankensop Creek. You'll see that little arrow pointing there. And Blankensop Creek actually flows into Swan Lake, and from Swan Lake goes into Swan Creek, which we'll be talking all about the Friends of Swan Creek watershed. And from there it goes into the Mainstem and exits down into Portage Inlet as indicated in the map. So this is what's called a flow diagram. It shows what creeks flow into other creeks or wetlands or lakes. And as you can see, there's quite a bit going on in this watershed. You'll see some of the names I mentioned earlier. This will give you an idea of just, how much activity there is. And and definitely thanks to CRD for producing this beautiful flow diagram to give us all context of where all our creeks are going. So the first group we're going to talk about today are the Beaver Elk Environmental Stewards. So in the grand scheme of things, they're essentially our newest stewardship group we're working with, and they're going to be working initially on Haliburton Brook. They will be working on other creeks around the lake, but this will be our first focus. Now, we've been working with the CRD to get them into the park to undertake habitat restoration. We'll be doing things like removing log jams, enhancing creek habitat for trout to spawn in, as well as undertaking water quality, which the bees have just started recently. And water quality is particularly important because if you look at the upstream end You'll see that the creek flows down by what you may not see, but it's a graveyard, and also flows underneath the highway. So there's lots of potential for metals and other things to make their way into the water, and also hydrocarbons. So we'll be working together with the bees to undertake this water quality monitoring program, as well as the other activities. Now, back in January of 2020, we actually held a Streamkeepers training course on Haliburton Brook, including some of the bees themselves. And this was a great opportunity for us to go have a look at the creek, assess it, teach some bees some great techniques, and then generate some activities to work on into the future. And that's how we came up with the jam removals and as well as the rock additions. So definitely looking forward to working more with the bees. Now we're just going to speak on the Goward Springs stewards who operate in Goward Springs area. And these springs are named for the many springs found in this smaller sub-watershed, natural springs adding water to the creek. And as you can see, like I mentioned before, it flows into Viaduct Flats and then down into Quick's Bottom in the Mainstem. So this is Rico. He's a property owner in Goward Springs, and he approached us seeing that his particular bit of creek along his property was fairly degraded. So we went in there with the Goward Springs stewards and undertook some restoration. Here's one of the riffles that we actually built back up. It appears that these riffles had been built back in the day but had fallen apart. So we built them back up and added spawning gravel for the many trout that Rico has noticed swimming up and down his creek. And on the left, you'll see Lynn, and on the right, Sarah, and they volunteer for the Goward Springs Stewards. And Lynn is very good at coordinating many different events for the volunteers, including ecological restoration. So many thanks to that group, and look forward to working on some more bits of creek with them in the future. So now we're moving on to the Colquitz River Restoration Project. There's two phases of this, in summer of 2019 and then 2020 as well that just passed. We'll call them phase 1 and phase 2, and I'll just take you through a little bit of the adventure as we go through these slides. There's an arrow down there pointing out where the restoration took place near Copley Park, and the first year in 2019, it was about 120 meters of linear restoration, and in 2020, about 80. So in total, over the 2 years, we've restored, in partnership with Saanich, about 200 linear meters of creek habitat. And in a moment, you'll see just what that looks like. So before we go and undertake any of these restoration activities, you might imagine that it could be, a little dangerous for the fish with all the machines. So what we do as biologists is we isolate the site, meaning we'll dam it off and let the water decrease. And while we're doing that, we'll go in and electrofish, as well as some other netting activities. But essentially, we want to salvage these fish and save them and move them up and downstream so they're not hurt during the project. If you're wondering what electrofish means, well, just have a look at that Ghostbuster pack you see in this video. What happens is we shock the fish, and so they'll get knocked out, but we'll put them in buckets and move them safely up or downstream. And that way they won't be damaged during the actual work, and they bounce back fairly quickly. And once the fish are salvaged from the site, we can maintain dams and bypass pipes or other methods in order to ensure that the site stays relatively dry so we can work safely and effectively and prevent fish from swimming back onto the site. Of course, for that, we use nets up and downstream. Here's a great photo of Peninsula Streams staff as well as the municipality of Saanich staff working together at armoring the bank. Now, what you see here is cabling and anchoring of these rocks and this woody debris into the banks. And of course, that's going to help protect the banks, but will also provide habitat for little critters who can go and hide in these little spaces. And here's some more. That's Robin from the municipality of Saanich, drilling a hole into the rock so we can tie that piece of woody debris in there. Stumps like that are great because they have lots of space for fish and other critters to hide in. And you'll also see an odd-looking machine called a spider excavator, and it's just absolutely fantastic at undertaking creek work. And so with any restoration project, every so often some opportunities come up to provide some education, and this is no different. This is a summer camp of students that came walking by, and Ian Bruce, executive coordinator of Peninsula Streams, giving them a spiel on the project. And this was great because those students could walk away knowing a little bit more about the project, a little bit more about the fish, and when to come back to see them spawning with their parents. And so once the creek and the work had been undertaken, planting was done in November of 2019. As you can see, quite a few people showed up, and that split rail fence into the future will help prevent people from trampling those plants. But if you look just right down the center there, that's a little path to a viewing area, which is a great way to go teach some students about salmon, creeks, or what have you. Here's some volunteers hard at work. Craig Elder, you'll see him a bit later at the Friends of Swan Creek slides. And now we move into August 2020 when phase 2 of the project was undertaken. Again, here are the Saanich staff busy at work putting up that net to make sure fish don't swim on site when we're working. And this was another one of those education opportunities. To the right, there's actually a group of young students, and Robin and Dave Clough here. Dave Clough, who is the head biologist of this particular project, was showing them what little fish we caught in the creek. And it was just a great way to get them excited about it while we were doing our inventory for the project. So win-win-win. Here we go. There's Dave again with his stick and just guiding Walter to move some of that rock into the creek. Walter is the operator for Altera Spider Excavating. And here again, a bird's eye view from the bridge. You'll see some woody debris and some rock that he's going to move. As well, you'll see a series of hoses over here, and those are used to bypass the water around the site. And now this is a video of Robin, again from Saanich, using this dumper, which was really, really great for moving rock in and around the creek. Very convenient. You'll see her hop in, slide down, and there you go. We have some more videos as well. There's just one of pushing some rock in. This one, just Walter, adding some more rock to the creek. You'll see some of that armor on the left there. That's going to help protect the banks. And this is just another one of the dumper. As you can see, it came in handy for a number of different activities on this project. So, and our newest activity in the Colquitz Watershed would be this planting, because it just happened a few days ago. Here's a good one of a mother and a daughter hard at work, passing on that knowledge of ecological restoration. Here you'll see Rick Hatch, who laid out the plants and set up different quadrants so that volunteers could disperse better to make it safe in terms of COVID. A million thanks to Rick. He's just great. He knows his plants and always very enthusiastic. And here's just one last one of a series of volunteers at work. It almost looks like they lined up like that on purpose, but this was very candid. So that's the Colquitz Restoration Project. Now we're going to be moving on to something a little bit different. The creek that this project ran adjacent to is Blankensop Creek, which I mentioned earlier flows into Swan Lake. And this one is called the Lochside Meadow Project. So just to give you some context, you'll see in this photo there's a series of grass. Invasive, non-native grass, riddled with ticks and all else, and just not a great site necessarily ecologically. This is BC Hydro property. So a little while back, BC Hydro expanded their substation, and through the expansion, a couple trees had to be removed. So they donated some money to the North Quadra Community Association, who Peninsula Streams works with, to undertake some creek work. But unfortunately, Blankensop Creek in that particular area would be a little tricky to work in. So instead, we decided to undertake the Lochside Meadow Project. So this will just give you some context of what it looked like before. So this field had all those grasses and lots of seeds down there, and essentially we needed to strip all that soil away so those weeds wouldn't just grow back. So in this photo, you'll see an operator from Don Man Excavating who donated their time in kind, and they stripped half an acre of material. It's quite a bit. In the next photo, which I'll show now, you'll get an idea of just how large that is. And what you see here is it's the planting event, but I want to guide your attention to the soil. In total, we added about 264 yards of soil to this project. Nice, clean soil that we could plant new plants and not worry about invasive seeds growing through. And now, I'd like to show you a video of what that planting actually looked like. Kind of a cool panning. It was really nice. We had a First Nations blessing before the event, and lots of people came out, and we certainly got a whole lot done. Now, in total, over 1,600 plants were added, and half an acre of seed as well. And this is what it looks like. Isn't that beautiful? Look at all the flowers. If you were a bee, wouldn't you want to just fly in there and start pollinating? Well, that brings us to our next point. So, this meadow is great ecologically, but it's also very important because it's going to help attract pollinators to the region. And for those you know the Blankensop Valley, it's very much a farming community. So the more pollinators, the better. So with the Pollinator Partnership, we undertook these surveys, and often also with Reynolds High School students, in order to get a better understanding of the pollinators using the area. We surveyed before the project happened, not a lot of pollinators, but since then we've seen a lot more and a larger diversity coming into the area. And here's just a photo of some of the maintenance that's undertaken on the meadow, because of course weeds do grow in. So this is the team hard at work and here's some recent maintenance. And what we did here was use line trimmers to mimic the disturbance regime from burning. So as you can see, this is just before we went out and did that, but we're going to monitor it into the future and see what difference it makes. And this was guided by employees of Sanish Native Plants, and their expertise has been paramount in guiding this project. So, now we're moving on to Swan Creek Enhancement. Remember that photo from the beginning, that huge pile of rock? Remember that? Just remember 100 metric tons. So, the creeks in the Greater Victoria area, many of them are void of rock and gravel. And this was because historically the areas were drained. So When you dig down the creek to drain them, they didn't have any rock left. So you'll often see these creeks, basically just clay ditches. So the Friends of Swan Creek have been adding this rock and other material to the creek and actually have been able to see these fish come back and spawn. So just brace yourselves. In a few slides, we're going to watch those salmon at work. But first, let's see what work had to be done in order to create that habitat in the first place. So this is a photo of the Friends of Swan Creek watershed and also students for the Salish Sea who came out. They wanted to learn a bit more about habitat restoration. Of course, the Friends of Swan Creek are a great group to learn from. And it's always good to have a few extra hands to get that rock in the creek. Here we are. This is the Friends of Swan Creek. Some of the rock has been used up, as you can see. And so just like the Colquitz project, before we did work on our bits of creek, we like to salvage the fish so we're not going to do any damage. So again, we did some electroshocking, and it's a great way to show volunteers what little critters actually live in the creek. Here's one of the riffles after construction looking downstream. And in 2020, we had a whole new pile of rock. As you can see, big rock and also the spawning gravel, which they spawn in. And there you go. There's Art Krause. He's just having a look at the riffle. You can actually see the pump right here. So what we're doing is we're pumping around the site so we can essentially make this as dry as possible, reducing harm to fish and also making it easier to work in the creek itself. Here's looking downstream after it's been pumped, but after the riffle's been completed, you'll see quite a bit of spawning gravel there. That'll be great for the salmon when they return. And here are the videos as promised. So there's some volunteers on the bridge. And if you look at this riffle, you can actually see some coho salmon working their magic right now. So right from that bridge near the CRD pump station along Swan Creek, that's where you can find that bridge. And the bridge has a rock there, Bob Cox Memorial Rock. One of the founders of the Friends of Swan Creek watershed who made this all possible. And just one more video of the salmon a little more close up. There you go, beautiful colors. All right, so we've talked about a lot of groups today. And so something that helps bring it all together is something called the Colquitz Coalition. Once a year, we have a meeting inviting all the groups operating in the Colquitz watershed in order to learn what others are doing and also to help put our efforts together so we can maximize the way we're operating within this watershed. Peninsula Streams also maintains the Colquitz Coalition website. And if you are a group working in the Colquitz watershed and you're not part of the coalition, please get in touch. And so here you go. You can visit the Colquitz Coalition website at colquitzcoalition.com. Now, this is a great opportunity for you to ask any questions. We'll open it up for you all. I'm sure some have been coming in as this presentation's been going on. I'd just like to note that the Lochside Meadow Project is not quite complete. We're still going to put up more fencing. We are going to have some more maintenance activities, and we also need signage for the education center, which is the trail leading through the center into the middle. So in the future, people can bring students or just anybody from the public really and teach them about meadow pollinators and all else. So on that note, I'd just like to open it up for any questions, and thank you for listening to us today.